I kind of put together a presentation based on Steve's email or email interactions that we've had. So that's why the title is a variety of topics related to entomology. And so what I want to overview the presentation, I'm going to cover 4 areas. One is how the Department of Entomology in Kansas State provides assistance to producers, Japanese beetle adult mitigation using traps, how the Department of Entomology at Kansas State University supports beekeepers, and then how insects over winter. I think that was kind of a timely topic, and then question discussion. Okay, so let's go through each, and if you have any questions, just feel free to raise your hand or interject. We'll go through this. So how many people are familiar with Kansas State University Entomology? Yeah. Do you know what they do? Or... well, yeah. And so what I want to introduce is my responsibility as Kansas State. As Steve indicated, I've been there probably for 20 years. I have 70 extension, 30 research, which means 100% of everything. I am the horticultural entomologist. Extension is getting hit, budgets and everything. We only have 2 faculty members, myself, another person with over 70% extension. He handles field crops. I handle horticulture. I handle greenhouses, nurseries, turf grass, landscapes, interior-scapes, conservatories, Christmas trees, vegetable trees, hemp and pollinators. I have no days bored, basically. I've got plenty to do overall. How much time I devote to these is how much time I have to do during the day. What do I do? A lot. I'm out there doing, I am not selling anything, I'm providing education, basically. So this is a field day down at it's down by the John Kerr Center in Wichita. This is, I do all the master gardener training related to entomology, and sometimes I'll get into pesticide use and safety. So there I'm giving a talk to master gardeners, and here we have a field day where I'm discussing management of vegetable pests. Okay, so I get out of the office and I do a lot of field work. I'll introduce one of the projects that I work with the producers. We also put together a newsletter. It's called the Kansas State University Extension Entomology Newsletter. I write all the articles related to horticultural insect tests. We have myself, Anthony Zukov is down in basically Garden City. He's more of a diagnostician. Jeff Whitworth handles the field crops. So I handle horticultural crops. Jeff handles corn, soybean, wheat, milo, sorghum, those. Okay, that's it. That's it for Kansas, basically, overall. So we put together this publication April to about November. You can get online and get access to it, or get on the listing and have it there. We also develop extension. I develop extension publications. I probably developed 90% of what we have available at Kansas State. This is what I do bring copies of the insect and mite pest vegetable garden. So it's one of the handouts that you can get after. There should be plenty of copies for everybody. So this is kind of what I do basically is educational components, not just Kansas, but because basically the surrounding states and others don't have extension entomologists. I handle regional, national, international. There are lots of travels, consulting. But you look at Colorado, they don't have entomologists anymore. Nebraska, their entomologists died for Baxendale. Missouri has hardly no extension. In Oklahoma State lost their extension person last year. He went to industry. Okay, that's the status right now overall, and it's going to get worse where it gets better. As long as I'm vertical, I'll give talks and help people. And so that's my responsibility is outreach and extension. Yes, ma'am.
Are you working with the regulators with the Kansas Department of Ag?
That's a good question. I do not work. Okay, I do not work with regulation, but I answer questions. Wayne Simon, when he was there, he retired. He would keep me abreast of the bee kills, the drifts, and I would help him I would do education programs, but I'm not involved in the regulation litigation. I'll answer your questions, but I'm not involved in that basically. I have worked with the state extension, the state entomologist. He left. We have a Mary Rachel Wilkins, but I haven't worked. She's relatively new. So my interaction with KGA is somewhat minimal at this point. Okay. So what we try to do is we try to take our research programs and move into extension, because this is what we do in the university, and this is what we get the information outsourced. That's how the whole academia works. I mean, taking research, publications, papers nobody's going to read, and journals nobody even knows about, but the key is getting that information in the hands of the producers. So what I want to talk about is a project that we've been doing the last 2 years with the Christmas tree growers. Christmas trees have they have a number of pests they deal with. And the main one is pine torch scale. These are the red or the nymphs on the needles, and these are the females. And I have a Riker mount I'll distribute. In 2020, in 2020, I got a call from Christmas tree growers saying, I have honeydew, I have these insects on my Christmas tree, I can't even sell my Christmas tree. So in October, I met with 2 of them, and lo and behold, it was pine torch scale. They couldn't even sell their Christmas trees in 2020. Okay. So I said, we're gonna have a problem, we're gonna solve it. So what happened was we started the project, and that's what they do to Christmas trees. That's black city mold that grows on, these are sucking scales, the scales, and they produce honeydew, which is sticky liquid, and on that honeydew is black city mold grows. Okay, that reduces the salability of the Christmas trees. Okay, so what we did was I worked with 4 Christmas tree growers in Kansas. This is in 2021, but it's also this last year. Country Christmas trees, the Wakarucha, Eldon Clausen, Prairie Elf Christmas trees, Lawrence, it's Catherine Jetty, Midland Holland Holiday Pines, Phil Wegerman, and D&G Christmas Tree Farm, Lewisburg, Doug Everett. Okay, so what we were to do is, first of all, we're designing, this is where they're at. This is where Eldon's at. That's where Jeff and Kathy, Phil, and I would drive once a week, or every 2 weeks, depending on whether to visit their operations. What I'm doing is, so what we decided to do, we're going to monitor the activity of pine torch scale red nymphs. I showed you that image, and in that Riker mount is a vial. That vial contains the red nymphs, okay, the crawler stage. So what we did was scouting from June through November. These were actual dates I did in 2021. And what we're doing is detecting the nymphs. Every organism has a weak link. The nymphs and the crawlers are the susceptible life stages to insecticides. So what we're trying to do is find that vulnerable life stage, exploit it by, when we see them, spray insecticide. Okay, so that was where we're timing in the insecticide application. So this is Phil Wegerman. He's just showing what we do. So I would go along, tap branches over a white piece of paper clipboard. When I saw the red nymphs moving, and you can see them, it's time to spray. If they're dead, they're basically at that point they need to spray. Okay. So in addition, we wanted to determine how good the coverage was. So I provided, we call water sensitive paper. It's a T-jet product, it is yellow, and you put it out and you spray. And when you come back, you see what the color is. How this works is it's yellow, but whenever it comes into contact with moisture, it becomes blue. So you want that. You want blue, not that. And there was Doug Everett, who was D&G. He had some trouble initially, but what he did was he adjusted it. He got a new nozzle, adjusted his flow rate, and he did a better job. So when you're out, so you put those on your Christmas trees, put more, you can use a clothespin or whatever, and you spray. What do you want? That. That was Eldon Clausen's first one, and that is excellent coverage. That's what you want. Okay, again, going back, that's you put them out. Use a clothespin or whatever, catch them, spray, and that's what you want to see. So the bottom line is this thorough coverage of all plant parts is going to translate in the high mortality of the pine torch scale nymphs. Okay, and the more we kill, the less we're dealing with in the next generations. Okay, so this is so basically what we found: the timing of the insecticide applications when the susceptible life stage, the red nymphs are crawlers, and the pine torch scale is active. Thorough coverage of all plant parts, needles and branches, reduce problems later on in the growing season. The bottom line was no honeydew, no black city mold later on, and ridiculous other things. So, what was the end? So the results of the project was this: no live pine torch scale red nymphs from July to November. because of the timing of the sprays. Monitoring pelt time and sex set applications accordingly, and the water sensitive paper provided a assessment of coverage with the sex set applications. Like I said, Doug had made adjustments to the nozzle and the flow rate, and he increased his coverage. The bottom line is all Christmas tree farms, their trees were marked. They could sell. That's a substantial difference from 2020. Yes, ma'am.
So does this spray harm any other pollinators or?
Well, that's a great question. The thing about Christmas trees is there are no pollinators there because there's no flowering plants.
Okay.
Yeah, they were using primarily oils, mineral oil, based oil, but they use what they had, like malathion and acetate and things like that, what they had at hand. But we were not concerned about pollinators because there's no pollination occurring with the pine. So that was one advantage we had at that point. Okay, so when you look at extension, it's hard to quantify extension because there's no T-val scores of teaching and there's no, grants or papers. But what really comes into play are the testimonies. This is what Catherine said. Hi, Raymond. That's me. It has been a very rewarding experience working with you on the Pine Quarter Scale project. Thank you for your dedication to this. This is from an email. She said, dedications matter, and it is good to have it behind us. Well, for this year anyway. You saved a lot of trees for us. Thank you very much. Phil said this. Those of us who are part of the Pine Quarter Scale project are most grateful for all you did to educate us and help us save our Christmas trees. That's what we're there for. That is the impact of extension outreach. Yes, ma'am?
So with the pine tortoise
Scale?
here.
Yeah.
It affects the tree and then the tree dies. Is that it?
Okay.
Or
That's
is it just makes it an unsellable product?
actually both. If you get heavy pine tortoise scale populations, depending on the size of the trees, the young ones, it can kill them. The big mature ones, it takes a lot of scale. But what it does is the honeydew and the black city mold reduces the marketability, saleability of those trees. And that's why in 2020, that's when I got the calls. They were telling me we can't sell our Christmas trees because nobody wants to buy them with the black city mold on it and stuff. So what we have done is we've identified a problem and we've solved it. And the results from last year, 2022, were exactly the same, except we reduced the number of applications because we killed so many, we were on top of them in 2021. We got fewer that came in 2022. At least that was my experience going out there and scouting, monitoring for the news. Yeah, yeah. So this is one of many. I also have a green stick bug project on grapes, working with growers in Hartford, Kansas. We have a biocontrol program of greenhouses in Wamego and working with Baldwin City, Baldwin Farms down in Baldwin City, scouting for apple pests, primarily Punctophilia. And those are all successful field research projects. So this is how extension is helping producers, basically. That one makes the difference. Any questions on that? So now I want to get into this Japanese beetle. I'm going to have Japanese beetle. Yes. Japanese beetle adults, of course, when you're only out for 3 months, you only have two things on your mind: sex and food, and sometimes it's not done. They insects that don't waste time, they're very efficient. Let me talk about the Japanese beetle though. It is native to Japan. It was introduced in the USA in 1916, Riverton, New Jersey. The adults are present during the summer, primarily June through August. They came in September. We have seen them in October. They feed on over 300 plant species. The adults are a third to half an inch long. The key diagnostic characteristic is they have about 14 white tufts of hair in the periphery of the abdomen. Okay, there you see them at the very back. They're very beautiful insects, unfortunately. Coppery colored, green, metallic, they look beautiful. The adults feed on leaves, flowers, and fruits. Sorry about that, Steve. The adults live about 30 to 45 days, and they're active on warm, sunny days and feed on the upper leaf surface, resulting in skeletonizing. They don't feed in the mid veins. They feed kind of in between, and the leaves give this skeletonized appearance, especially on tilia, really blooming. So the Japanese beetle has we call it an annual life cycle, one generation per year. Most of the time they're in the soil or grubs. That's why they're turf grass pests. So here we are in February, they overwinter as third instar larva or pupa, and then they'll come out, and then they're out as adults. And then the females will lay the eggs and start another generation. So it's one generation per year. Okay, that's why we call them annual life rounds. These things. On one hand, they should be legal. On the other hand, they might have a value. There's a lot of information about Japanese beetle traps. This is examples of two kinds out there. These are, this attracts the female, that attracts the male. I'll talk about that right now. So what we have here is when you put these traps out, you're trapping both males and females. There is a pheromone lure. This is a septa to lure the males. There's a floral attractant to attract the females. Okay, so that's within these. And so here is the beetle bagger. This is, I brought an example of just the box right here. But what's really interesting to note is the active ingredients in some of these materials. When you look at the floral lure, the chemicals are eugeneol and geraniol. Those are basically in rose leaves. When a Japanese beetle feeds on a rose leaf, these volatiles are given up. We call them herbivore-induced plant volatiles. Geraniol and eugeneol are emitted, and that's why roses are so susceptible to Japanese beetle. So they're basically using natural lure, natural volatiles from roses to put in the floral. And then here is a sex lure to attract the male. Okay. So that's what's in most of the Japanese beetle traps. Is it's a dual approach. You're getting the females with the floral lure and the males with the pheromone. So you can put these out and you can get tremendous amounts of Japanese beetles. Now remember, Japanese beetle adults can fly up to 5 miles. Okay, overall. So you're getting these hordes of Japanese beetles coming in. When I was at the University of Illinois for 6 years, where I came here, which they had a worse problem there. These traps are basically smothered. They're just overflowing with the Japanese beetle adults. So these are not killing them. You're luring them, but you can put some liquid in here that will, when they get in, it kills them, like kerosene or some liquid overall. But mostly you're just using them to attract them and the detection device. This is what I brought. This basically is a trap that had been out for 2 years. This is up in Hiawatha, Grimm's Gardens. We had it out for 2 years, and it was still catching Japanese beetles.
Wow.
Okay, so this is I put by my desk. I can see it's really awesome. There's a contest. How many Japanese beetles goes from here? Basically, but these traps. The volatiles are very sensitive. I mean, they can bring in, and remember the volatiles don't travel very far because ultraviolet light in summertime can break them down overall. But that's how sensitive these beetles are. Now, this is a publication from a colleague of mine who retired last year in Potter, Kentucky. And he's done a lot of work with Japanese beetles because they're from Kentucky. He did some studies looking at Japanese beetle traps, and after his studies, this is what it says. Use of a single Japanese beetle trap in small-scale multiple trap arrangements will not prevent or reduce defoliation of nearby plantings and will probably increase the damage inflicted upon both highly preferred and relatively less attractive hosts. That is something that occurs more in the urban environments when you're growing roses and all these susceptible things. But really, it is for extension. What we recommend is buying them as Christmas present for your neighbors, and that's about it. That's all we go basically on. We really just don't recommend them overall for those types of situations. However, there have been studies done on matched trapping design for organic control of Japanese beetle adults. This is done in Lincoln University, Jefferson City. They did some matched trapping. I have to admit, I reviewed this publication. There were some problems overall. But they say match trapping may provide effective alternative management options for Japanese beetle, for Pillage japonica, for lesser known insecticides applied to the crop.
What was the density of this trap?
The density is, I need to estimate.
I didn't see it there on that.
Yeah, That may be one of the problems with publications, Steve, maybe we have.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's a good, yeah, you have to get inside the paper. I think it was rejected from the first journal, but it got accepted. You know, if you keep putting it out there, it gets accepted eventually. It's the way it is in the science, in the peer review process, which is broken anyway. But yeah, yeah, oh, my colleagues never, there is no scientific review process, it's absolutely broken. There are journals out there, if you pay enough, you don't have to have your publications reviewed. That's how bad it is right now. Yeah, pretty bad. We don't fall in that. We have high standards of quality with our science at Kansas State University. Okay. So, you know, this is what's happening. This will work like in a rural area. But here's what happens in the farm. This is Brandon Tyler. He owns an orchard. He's been placing Japanese beetle traps around his peach or an apple orchard since 2018. This is where it will probably work, where you're attracting them. There are two terms. There's a push-pull strategy. This is the pull. You're pulling them away, getting them in here, and so they're not feeding on the apples or the peaches, especially when they're fruit, because they're very susceptible. Okay, so really. I told Steve I'm gonna do some work with because I scout Rocky Ford is our turf grass facility, and I have the plots there. I'm gonna set up some Japanese beetle traps this year because I've been detecting Japanese beetle grubs larvae in my turf plots for the last 2 years. That's the first time we've ever, in my 10 years of scouting and monitoring, I've actually been able to find Japanese beetle grubs in my plots. So this is kind of the extent with the traps. Okay. So the next topic, so I had this is extension public weekend development. I did bring copies for everybody, and that's everything you want to know about Japanese beetles. What we're going to ask. Okay, that's all I want. Any questions on that? Yes, Steve?
How can you tell between Japanese beetle larvae and say, stink, I'm gonna call them stink bugs, I don't know what the actual name is, or other larvae that may be in your garden when you're filling up the bird?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. I'm giving a talk, actually, next week in Missouri by the airport on grub management in turf grass. What we do, how do you tell, that's a great question. So when you're digging up grubs, what we do is we look at the back end of the grub. Now, we're not proctologists, but what we look for is what we call the rastral pattern, the hair pattern on the butt. And that's how we identify. That's how I identify, for example, May beetle, they have scattered hairs on the butt. Mass shaper, they have like a line of trees. Japanese beetle larvae have kind of a V shape in there. But we use, when I look at the abdomen, when I have another microscope, I look at the hair pattern on their butt to tell the difference between the two, between milligrams. Again, we're not proctologists, but that's how we do it. That's how, and identification is critical because some of our grub species, like the May June beetle, they have a 3-year life cycle. So if you're using insecticides and they're on their 2nd year, you're talking about fat grubs. You're not going to kill them with insecticide because they're too big. Okay, so identification is critical, and that's how we do it with grub species. He's looking at it's called rastral, but it's mostly the hair or trichomes. That's what plants. It's the hair pattern on the back. I spent a lot of time looking at grub butts. Yes, ma'am.
My brothers used to, well, before they moved, whatever, we lived in Idaho and they would go fishing. They would pound rebar into the ground, attach electrical wiring to them, and then turn it on to the battery, and all the worms would come up. Would that not work with grubs too? Because they don't like the soil to be disturbed.
Yeah, that'll work for earthworms,
But not for grubs.
but not for grubs. There's a lot of misinformation about electrocution, electrical charges. That has never been shown to be effective on grubs. It's been tried. But earthworms, yeah, you can bring them up.
Sure.
Okay. So the next topic I want to cover is bees. How does Kansas State University help beekeepers? We have, really in Kansas, essentially, we have about 2 to 3 organizations. One is the Kansas Beekeepers Association, which is in Kansas. I went to the meeting, I was on I've been kind of involved with the board, I've given several talks. And then the other one, which Chad's a member of, Northeastern Kansas Beekeepers Association, that's the one I've also given talks at. I've given talks in both these. I'm supportive. I provided education for anybody else and questions overall. So what we do is we've actually put on in 2019, we put on a beekeeping basic workshop in Manhattan campus, and it was well attended. We had Rick Anderson there. How many know Rick Anderson? He's a beekeeper out in on 24. He's retired now. We had Gary LaGrange, who of course had at that point Prairie. He was working with the soldiers in Fort Riley, and I gave a presentation. It was well attended, and also I did a webinar for the National Gardeners on bees overall. So we're providing education overall, and then I'm getting out there. This is Keith Westervelt. He owns Bluebell Nursery in Manhattan, and he raises bees. And I'm out there helping. We're looking probably for varroa mite, just making sure we got cat brood. But you know, we gotta. This is where it's fun. I mean, get out there. There's Keith and there's I, and you know, we've got a frame holding up the bees. So I'm out there helping them. We kind of monitor for queens. We look for varroa mite, any other maladies associated with bees overall. Okay, that's what we do. But also, I do extension publications, and this is one I did on pesticides and bees, which I have handouts for everybody. And that talks about, you know, the effects of the neonicotinoids and fungicides. It's up to date. It's factual. It's not all this misinformation out there about neonicotinoids and everything else out there. I just gave a talk on bees and pesticides in where was it? Because I was in Colorado last week. But this last one I gave a talk on this. Actually, it's a webinar for Canada. Bees and pesticides, what's the truth? And I talk a lot about what's in this publication. So, any questions about bees or at this point? I love going out to visit beekeepers. In Kansas, it has really got some really great beekeepers. Now, remember, beekeepers don't make money on honey; it's pollination services. So in February, everybody goes to California to pollinate the almonds, and that's where they make the money. Okay, but they do. Pardon? I said I'm a hobbyist, so I understand they don't make money selling honey. Yeah, I mean, they do sell honey in some of the nurseries. I know the Bluebell Nursery carries the honey that Gary used to work with the soldiers in Fort Riley. The organization. It's sad the organization split off and then dissolved. In fact, it used to be a really nice beekeeping equipment place off of 24, right behind the Garras. It shut down. They were giving classes. I've spoken there, but politics, it's ugly. It's kills everything basically. We don't need to deal with that. Is there a question? Yes, ma'am.
I know you said that the pollination is what is the moneymaker, but what kind of trauma does that give to the bee when they're transport and there's shakes and rattles and bumps and all kinds of stuff?
Oh, that's excellent. Yeah, the transportation. When I give my talks on honeybees, when I give my talks on pollinators, you know, there are various stressors that impact functionality. Varroa mite, small hive beetle, habitat fragmentation. But the transportation, I have a map that I use, and these little insects are transported thousands of miles, and a lot of times they're starving to death because the only viable food source that they need is, well, the only plants that get viable food source is alfalfa and clover. Bees are very polyelectric, which means they have to go to many flowers to get viable protein in pollen and nectar for carbohydrates and protein and vitamins and minerals. These bees, that's stressful. They're almost starving to death. You know, and when you put a hive in an almond orchard, how do you know you're getting the bees that you released? And a lot of bees can carry diseases. Well, they get American foul brood, European foul brood, chalk brood, other viruses. So there's a lot of issues with that going on, and that impacts the health of the bees. Yeah. So there's no smoking gun. There's a lot of factors involved: pesticides, poor bee management, pathogens, parasites, the transportation issue, lack of summer foraging, the winter mortality. All those are associated with declines. You know. Yeah, great question. So now I talk about kindly how insects survive the winter, because I get this question. Last year was minus 16 in February. How did it impact the insects? Not very much when it goes up to 5 degrees the next day. But I think it's interesting because people just don't understand, these insects have evolved to survive. They don't care about smartphones, iPads, Facebook, whatever. They're designed to grow, survive, and reproduce. So the main thing, what is overwintering? Insects overwinter. So overwintering is a physiological condition of growth retardation or arrest that is primarily designed to overcome lower than optimal temperatures during winter. That's when we talk about, I always ask the question, how do insects overwinter? Because the stage of the overwinter, the location of the overwinter impacts your ability to survive. So insects are poikilothermic. Remember, that means they're cold-blooded, so they respond to temperature. We're warm-blooded, so we're really innocuous on that. So the insects respond differently depending on the temperature. The warmer the temperature, the more favorable their development. The life cycle takes less time overall. So insects have various ways to overcome winter. They can migrate, moving over great distances. That means they do not overwinter in Kansas and the Midwest, so we get them through the South. Then there's the diapause. That's a physiological state of arrested growth and development, or they go into dormancy. That's a seasonal period in the life cycle in which growth, development, and reproduction is suppressed. Okay? Makes sense? So the first one is migration. How many remember fall armyworm last year? It was biblical. Okay, fall armyworm was devastated lawns. I mean, my phone was off the hook, emails, I gave talks on it. But the fall armyworm cannot overwinter in Kansas. It overwinters in Texas and Florida because it's warm. And then as the jet stream moves up, that's how we get it. Fall armyworm, a leafhopper. A leafhopper doesn't overwinter in Kansas. It comes up from the south, Texas primarily. Okay, so a number of our insects that we get are coming from the south and then moving up as the jet stream adjusts itself moving north. Okay, so that's migration. So what are some of the abiotic stimuli that help insect pests know when winter's approaching? Because what's interesting is you have a nice day in February, and, wondering, well, aren't the insects going to come out? No, because there's no plants growing. They have synchronized themselves to know to come out when there's certain degree day units. You've heard of degree day units or cumulative degree day units. When you get to a certain degree day temperature and time period, that's when the triggers them to come out. Okay, so photo period, temperature, moisture, and the interaction between these two are what trigger the stimuli that help insects to know when they're approaching. Okay. So, what are some of the factors that affect the weather on insects? Well, the key thing is the length or duration of cold spells. When people ask, well, is the -16 going to kill insects? Only if it's for 2 weeks, not when it's for 1 day. If you want to see insect mortality, you need temperatures -20 for 2 weeks. That's going to substantially impact it. Now, have we had that in a long time? No. The other one is a snow dip, the cover. Snow is an insulating factor. I'll get more into that. And then the extremes in sudden temperature changes. Okay. So what are the overriding strategies of the insects? So the insect pests can seek protected locations outside or inside that provide protection from repeated freezing and thawing. Or they can get cracks and crevices in loose bark, of woody plants, fallen leaves, and debris on the ground. Or they can come in your home. Yes.
Have you seen any difference between urban and rural settings in terms of overwintering? I mean, generally inside town, it tends to stay a little warmer, tends to be maybe maybe up to 5 to 10 degrees cooler in the country.
Yeah, that's a good point. Normally, in what we see is that in these cities, in Kansas City, where you've got these heat sinks, number one, the insects can feed longer because it's warmer, and they don't always go into a diapause because it stays warmer. In a rural environment where you don't have that heat accumulation, they go into winter fast, or they go into overwintering faster. That's where in the big cities, like when I was in Illinois, Chicago, which is a massive city, I mean, they had scale problems all the way to November, December because of the accumulation of heat. The concrete, the asphalt, that microenvironment, microclimate is enough to keep the insects active. And they can sometimes go through another generation because of that. Yeah. Good question. And so we're gonna go, I'm gonna go through some of these very slowly. So the cold duration, about 5 to 6 weeks, contributes to insect pressure mortality. Okay, about 5 to 6 weeks, cold temperatures. Rapid freezing and thawing cycles are detrimental to insect pests. And just like plants, they don't like that because of the expansion and rupturing of cells, especially when they're not prepared for wintertime. Okay. However, most insect pests utilize overwintering sites, soil leaf litter, and that provides protection from cold extremes in the winter. Some of these environments, it could be minus 16 out at the end of their temperature, but it could be 20 degrees where they're at overwintering. Okay. Good. Well, that's good. When I give talks just on overwintering or the impact of winter on insects, I bring publications in. And it's very interesting. There's the ambient temperature like minus 20, minus 30, but where the insects are at overwintering, it's like 10 to 15 degrees. And it's really interesting how they can find those areas and survive. And the differential between the ambient air temperature and the overwintering location. So the two means by which insects deal with cold temperatures is either freeze tolerance or freeze intolerant. Freeze tolerance is the ability to tolerate the formation of ice in the body tissues and fluids. Insect pests convert 50% or more of their total body weight into extracellular ice. Okay, so that's freeze tolerance. Those are ones that are outside. Okay, freeze intolerance, or also called avoidance, is the ability of insect pests to survive low temperatures by means of supercooling. I'll talk about that. They stop feeding and they empty their digestive system before winter to remove any substances that could contribute to the formation of ice crystals. So they basically do all water out of their body, so there's no risk of freezing. Remember, you know, for ice cubes, that when anything freezes, it expands. So they don't want that because if their cells freeze, they expand and rupture and can kill them. Okay. What is supercooling? Supercooling is a process of lowering the temperature of a liquid below the freezing point so the liquid does not become solid. That's what insects can do. The question is, how do they do that? Okay. I'm going to tell you. Insect pests preserve liquids in their bodies at lower temperatures by reducing the body water content. I told you about that. This is accomplished by using compounds called cryoprotectants. And that includes polymers, sugars, and glycerol. They have their own natural antifreeze. You know, that we use for our radiator, you know, that lowers the temperature in which freezing occurs in the body. So these cryoprotectants and cryoprotection associated with freeze tolerant insect pests. Most insect pests in overwinter based on freeze tolerance. That was this one. Accumulate polyols and carbohydrates, in which glycerol is the antifreeze, is the most common in the body source. So they develop their own antifreeze, just like our radiator for a car, and that's how that allows them to survive lower temperature. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. So many insect pests overwinter deep in the soil where the temperatures are higher. A snow cover is an insulating factor. It could be minus 5 degrees out here, but in the soil, it's probably 40 degrees Fahrenheit. You do not want a snow cover. If you want insect mortality, you want it to be bare snow or bare tree. So a thick snow cover acts as an insulating agent that enhances survival. In fact, the soil temperature can be 20 to 30 degrees warmer than the ambient air temperature. Okay, so when I get these calls and Dr. Cloy, it's minus 20 and there's snow on the ground, isn't that going to kill the insects? I'm sorry, but the soil temperature is probably about 20 to 30 degrees Fahrenheit. It's not going to happen. So the cold avoidance. So this is what grubs do. So grubs move, Japanese beetles, move deeper in the soil profile as the soil temperature decreases and the soil temperature is more stable. That's the thing about grubs or insects and so on. They can go down deep in the soil profile. We're talking maybe sometimes 30 feet. And that's when the soil temperature is stable. There's no fluctuation like you would be near the surface. So Japanese beetle doves, you can see they're at the surface initially, but they start migrating deeper to stay in cold temperature. Now, if there was a snow cover here, they might move up a little bit, but they're going to sense the soil temperature differences, and they're going to move to the soil temperature more consistent. Stable. Okay, then they're not susceptible to these fluctuations in cold and thawing, which is very harmful to them and also plants. Okay? Any questions on that? Make sense? So insect pests can overwinter as either eggs, nymphs, larvae, pupa, or adults. Most of your aphids overwinter as eggs on plants. Okay. Caterpillars and borers mostly overwinter as larvae or pupa. Wood-boring insects will overwinter in the tree or shrub. Caterpillars on plant material, debris, or on plant, or even on structures. Like the mimosa webworm, which is a pest of mimosa and honey locust, overwinters on building structures. Okay. Adult beetle, true bugs, and beetles and true bugs overwinter as adults. Okay. So here's a list I put together: is bagworms overwinter as eggs. Now remember, every female bag on a plant contains between 500 and 1,000 eggs, and that's how they overwinter. That's why hand picking is recommended, because if you remove a female bag, you're removing about 500 to 1,000 eggs, which will not become caterpillars in the spring or summertime. Okay. Aphids, eggs, chinch bugs, which is a turf pest, overwinters as adults in the batch. Elm leaf beetle, which was biblical in Wichita this year, overwinters as adults in the home. They come inside the house. Fall webworm, pupa on structures. Cutworms, larvae, grasshoppers as eggs. They overwinter eggs in the soil. Lace bugs, eggs as adults, and then spider mites, eggs are adults. Japanese beetle overwinters as a larva or pupa in the soil. Leaf hoppers, eggs are adults, and then eastern tit caterpillar, that's an egg nest. Okay, so they're bagworms. The female bags contain between 500 to 1,000 offspring. Lace bugs, that's the eastern tit caterpillar. There's the elm leaf beetle, spider mites, and that is no longer the caterpillar. Okay, sorry about that, I used a term. Well, how do scales overwinter? I always get that question. This is the anonymous scale. And the white individuals are males, the brown ones are females. And I have extensive publication. I didn't have enough copies to bring, so I don't get the question, how do scales overwinter? And in that publication, I have a table showing how they overwinter. Most scales overwinter is either fertilized females, eggs, or second instar males. Okay, so why is that important? When they overwinter as eggs, they're very hard to kill with dormant oils. Okay. When they're overwintering as fertilized females and second instar nymphs, you can spray dormant oils in the winter and fall. Okay. Or like a mineral file. Okay. So you can get this publication online. Also, when they're overwintering as eggs, they come out later on in the year. If the overwinter is fertilized females, they come out in spring. Okay. So how they overwinter determines how difficult it is to kill them, and when you'll see crawlers and nymphs during spring, summer, fall. Okay, make sense? Yes.
Japanese beetles have any known pests either here or not pests?
Or natural enemies?
Yeah.
Yeah, the Japanese beetles have a number of beneficial insects. One group is the Typhia wasp. These are parasitoids that attack the egg, this larva in the soil. Then there's a tachinid fly that lays an egg on the adult thorax and burrows into it. The problem with these is they don't kill enough Japanese beetles to impact the populations. I've been in Tennessee in a meeting when they were doing these Typhia wasps. There was a fall and spring Typhia wasp, and again, there's this tachinid fly that we get. It's really interesting when people talk about, well, what about the beneficial insects? Aren't they doing something? Well, it's a numbers game. Ladybird beetles will eat aphids, but when you've got 5 million aphids out there, they can't eat enough. Okay, it's a numbers game. That's why these pests produce so many offspring because they know that you're into natural mortality and you're into predators. So that's why I'll just give you a number. One green peach aphid, this is a greenhouse. One green peach aphid, after 5 generations, which is about 5 months, how many offspring do you think can be produced? Now remember, in a greenhouse, all the aphids are females, there's no males. But one green peach aphid, if nothing else happened, natural mortality of predators, can produce 13 million aphids.
Wow.
After 5 generations. Excuse me, that's a shitload of aphids. That's a lot of aphids. Yeah, I don't know who the graduate student was that did that before. That was a lot of aphids. Yes, ma'am.
I was just gonna comment, the Japanese beetles go for my apple trees, and I noticed I had a ton of wheel bugs in the apple trees, and they were catching the Japanese beetles. And that was pretty cool to see until I realized, you can catch one. and
Yeah.
sit there with it for a really long time. Like it's still,
Yeah, wheel bugs are really
Yeah.
itchy. They're like a stegosaurus. And they have piercing sucking off, and so they come out and pierce it, but then they're only killing one.
yeah.
What about killing the
Like,
other
"Oh,
ones?
guys, let's go.
So that lets you know more of these ambush or wheel bugs. That's why it's a numbers game.
Yeah.
They just cannot regulate, manage the pest populations because they don't kill enough. People talk about ladybugs, yeah, the ladybugs are out there, but there's like a lot of aphids out there too, that they're not feeding upon. So, yeah, the insect world is very fascinating when you start talking about that. So dormant oils are used in the wintertime to kill insects or mites that overwinter on the plants. There's overwintering insects in their eggs that are on the plant, okay, overall. These work on certain mites that overwinter on plants. They will not work on mites that don't overwinter. But this is what when I was planting, fruit tree growers, this is what we use for San Jose scale. San Jose scale is a major scale pest on apples and pears. So they apply this in the wintertime to kill the overwintering fertilized. I think it's fertilized for second instar moves. And that reduces the number of crawlers or nymphs during the growing season. And there's a producer I work with down at Trails West, Quill and his wife. I helped them out, and we made substantial progress in reducing. When I went to his operation 2 years ago, he had apple trees, pears that were encrusted 100% with San Jose scale. Well, we initiated a program, and now last year, I just talked to them several months ago, it's under control. They have good harvest, less problems, but so that's again the impact of working with the producers out there in San Jose. So dormant oil applications target overwintering immature females, down the scale, obscure, and maple. They are not effective on scales of the owner's eggs. And the reason is because when you spray the oil, it'll kill the periphery of the eggs, but that protects the rest of the eggs from any contact. So dormant oils are not effective against pine needle or oyster shell scale. They are against those. So if we go back to the list here, they will not work on oyster, pine needle scale, but most of these other ones that when the scales overwinter fertilized females or second instar nymphs, that's when you're going to get mortality. Okay, that's when you can get some good mortality. If you get thoroughcover development. And that should be easy in the wintertime for fruit trees when the leaves are gone. Yeah. So what about the last one, the occasional beetles? This is the ones that come in your home. Okay, I'm sure you recognize some of these. Here they are, Asian ladybird beetle. How many have seen that in your home? Those ones that congregate at the corner, you can just sit there. And then when it comes spring, they get very active because they use up all their food resources. They want to get outside and then they box elder bug, non-leaf beetle, cluster flies, clover mites, and this is an invasive species that we have in Kansas, also gets in the home. Okay, if you remember read the New York article, there was I believe a home in New York that had about between 200,000 and 300,000 of these in the home. Wow, that's a lot. So here's an example of the ground. So birds getting chilly outside. Let's go to the party in the attic. So this is the brown bomber stink bug, which we have in Kansas. That's how bad it got in the eastern part of the country. Okay. So you have these insects that migrate You have these insects and mites that either freeze tolerance, treat avoidance, or you have ones that come inside the home, and then that's how they live in. Any questions on that? So, give you kind of a summary how insects overwinter. Insect pests can overwinter in various life stages: eggs, larvae, nymphs, pupa, and adults. Insect pests avoid cold temperatures by means of freeze tolerance or freeze avoidance. Snow cover acts as an insulating agent, providing protection from above ground winter temperatures. I've already covered that. Dormant oils are effective in general against insect and mite pests of overwinter as larvae, nymphs, and eggs located on plants, trees, and shrubs. Okay, so it's kind of gives you sort of a synopsis summary discussing the fourth component on overwintering. Any questions on that? Yeah.
So, so we're, like, a lot of people have fruit trees, and so you're trying to manage the Japanese beetle. Do you be better off to try and treat the soils or the grubs, or with the target of least pesticide use, or just spray them when they show up?
Just the Japanese beetles?
Yes.
Okay. What I recommend, this is my strategy, is if you've got fruit trees, you do drip irrigation or rely on natural irrigation, because if you're irrigating, that makes the turf area attractive to the females. So when you're dealing with Japanese beetles on fruit trees, it's mostly spraying. It's a spray.
Okay.
There, and most of your materials out there are very harmful to your pollinators. I mean, Carbaryl 7 is still used, unfortunately. How many use Carbaryl or 7 still? The pyrethroids out there, all those are toxic to bees. Okay, but you can avoid, because when they're feeding on the leaves, you can apply. I would go out there early in the morning when the ambient air temperature is over 50 degrees, 55 degrees Fahrenheit. That's when bees are active. If you go out there early on and spray, you'll minimize any direct toxicity on the bees. Yeah. And hopefully the residues will dry out. Yeah. But you know what? When I studied Japanese beetles, I've had a graduate student in Chicago work with them. It's really sad that we haven't made more progress in using, I would say, more selective insecticides against Japanese beetles. What we're using today is about what we used 50 years ago. Broad spectrum insecticides. People talk about neem oil. That doesn't work very well. There's been attempts to try it, but really, when you look at it like I do when I give my talks on Japanese beetles, I discuss the fact that we really haven't made much progress in terms of insecticide use. It's still broad spectrum materials that kill everything. Pollinators, beneficial insects, in addition to the Japanese beetle involved. And one of the consequences of that is that if you over spray too much Carbaryl, you'll stimulate another problem. And what happens during summertime, I'll get calls. People say, my anonymous bushes are losing their leaves, they're red and losing leaves, and it's because of spider mites. And I ask them, have you been spraying Carbaryl or 7? Yes, I have. How often? Twice a week. So what that person has done is killed all the natural enemies of the spider mites. The spider mites have resurged, and they are now the primary pest. We call that secondary pest outbreak. A lot of pests we deal with, primarily scales, are unintended consequence of spraying with broad spectrum insecticides. It's very careful. Yes, Steve?
Yeah, I don't want to hog the floor here. One of the things I try to do with my strawberry beds is mulch them with pine needles. Does that attract any harmful insects to the strawberry?
Did I hear the question? Strawberry. It doesn't attract any harmful insects, but some studies have shown like straw pine needles creates a very nice habitat for ground beetles to thrive. Ground beetles are predators. So that's a benefit. Yeah. So but nothing harmful that I understand. As you know, as pine needles degrade, they convert the pHs become more acidic. But I've never seen these studies in my experience indicate there's a negative consequence of that. Thank you. Yeah, good question. So with that, I think we're down to the end. And yeah, so I thank you for attention. Hope you all learned something. And that's all I have this evening. And I'm happy to any questions. Thank you very much. Good question. Are there any questions? Yes.
Back on Japanese beetles, one of our 4-Hers did a talk on spraying soapy water on the ground, and the soapy water goes in the ground and it brings the grubs up, and then the birds eat grubs. I thought that was a really interesting idea, but I've always wondered. if-
It doesn't work.
Yeah,
Okay, but what you can do, what we do, if you're dealing with a caterpillar, turfgrass pest like cutworm,
mhm,
spotted webworm, armyworm,
mhm,
you can apply a soapy water,
okay.
and that agitates them, and they will come up to the surface. That's how we scout them
But
on.
not for Japanese.
Not for the grubs. It works for your caterpillar pest,
Okay,
but not for your grubs.
okay.
There's a lot of misinformation out there. Hasn't been quantitatively determined something. But we do know that a pyrethroid or soapy based soapy water will agitate them, and you can bring them to the surface.
Okay.
Any other questions? Well, I do hope this was invigorating. I learned a lot. Enjoyed it. We had really good questions. So I will, shut her down, and we can grab some of the things in publications for we leave. And if you want some extra handouts, I think how before you email me the presentation. Sure. You want the PDF? That's fine. Yeah. Thank you. But I can also leave you some extra copies. It's this way. If we like to post that to our web. Okay. Yes. Yeah. Maybe send me an email or reminder. I still have your email. Okay. Now I'll convert it to PDF, and then that way. That's fine. Well, it's a lot of images. I know that's go through. I think you see the PDF. Okay. And then send it to you.
Thank you so much.